I'm commentating this video with a heavy heart, but I think people need to hear his words. Rayshard Brooks, as most people know by now, was a 27-year-old African-American man who was shot to death on June 12, 2020, by a man named Garrett Rolfe. Rolfe was a former police officer with the Georgia Police Department. Police were called when Brooks fell asleep in his car at a Wendy's restaurant drive-through lane. Brooks' breathalyzer exam indicated that his blood alcohol content was above the legal limit. Rolfe began to handcuff Brooks, and a scuffle ensued. Brooks got a hold of Rolfe's partner's taser and ran away with it. While Rolfe was pursuing him, it appeared that Brooks turned and attempted to fire a taser towards Rolfe, who then shot Brooks twice in the back. A third shot struck an occupied car nearby. Brooks died in surgery at the hospital. A driving under the influence conviction may have led to Brooks' parole being taken back and revoked, and he'd have to go back to prison.
Now I'm 27 years of age, full-time carpenter.
That was Rayshard Brooks in February this year, just months before he was shot and killed by an Atlanta police officer.
I've always been the type of person to, if you do some things that's wrong, you pay your debts to society.
Brooks shared his story about navigating the criminal justice system with a group called Reconnect.
Well, I just feel like some of the system could, look at us as individuals. We do have lives, it's just a mistake we made, and, not just do us as if we are animals, lock us away.
Rayshard Brooks was a restaurant worker who had been married for 8 years. He had 3 daughters and 1 stepson. In February 2020, Brooks did an interview where he discussed very openly and candidly about the year he spent in prison and the painful difficulties he had after being released.
I did get arrested. It was for a false imprisonment and financial credit card fraud. I got sentenced to do 1 year in prison.
When he got out, Brooks had no money, no car, and a mountain of debt.
For one individual to try to deal with all of these things at one point in time is just impossible. You have court costs, probation, just a lot of, you would have to have a lot of money. And I'm fresh out of jail.
Brooks' death came just a short time after the mass protests about police brutality had started and were ongoing in the United States and in many countries around the world. One of many catalysts that ended up starting the protests was the viral video of George Floyd being murdered by police when one of the police officers stuck his knee on his neck and kept it there for 8 minutes and 43 seconds while onlookers begged and pleaded for him to stop suffocating him. One of the reasons I wanted to show you this video was because people need to understand the police system, including the entire system of justice in America, is absolutely anything but just. It is corrupt on every level. It is for profit. It is not for rehabilitation. It is for punishment. It punishes the poorest Americans who are already suffering from the huge economic divide that capitalism on steroids has created in the last 50 years in America. If you're white, you might get lucky and be given the benefit of the doubt. If you're black, the system is ravaged with systemic racism at every turn. You will be treated like a hardened criminal. It will not matter what your education is, your wealth, or your innocence. The system's not broken. It's working exactly as it was meant to.
Fresh out of jail and in need of a job.
You go to filling out your application and you get to this question, have you ever been convicted of a crime or have you ever been arrested? And, you're sitting there like, oh my God, it just breaks your heart. It's hurting us, but it's hurting our family the most. So as we go through these trials and tribulations, we've made mistakes. And it just causes our kids to be angry inside, you know, and that's a hard feeling to stomach.
The origins of police in America is that of slave patrollers in the South. Police in America have always been the gatekeeper of systemic racism since the beginning of our nation. The promise of more accountability during the first wave of Black Lives Matter pacified most white people who, for the most part, didn't know a single solitary thing about the system of racism that Black people are forced to endure every single day in our country. Most white people thought that body cams and maybe some better training with implicit bias would solve the problems. But it has solved nothing. Every part of American life is riddled with systemic racism. The justice system in America is simply one. If you think about our racial history, imagine black codes, Jim Crow laws, sundown towns, redlining, the school-to-prison pipeline, mass destruction of wealthy black businesses and entire cities by white people, thousands of lynch mobs. These things were legal, state-sanctioned practices that almost guaranteed a black person would not accumulate wealth, no matter what they did. Some of the things that we do to incarcerated people are the last things any sane person would ever imagine doing to anyone, let alone a person who is struggling with life.
This, Brooks says, impacted his mental health.
It hardened me at a point, you know, to like, hey, you know, I have to have my guard up because the world is cruel. You know, it took me through seeing different things in, you know, in the system. You know, it just makes you harden to a point.
What Brooks said he needed most was help from the very system that locked him up.
Probation is not there with you every day, like a mentor or something. They're not taking you out to find a job. You have to do these things on your own, you know, and I feel like it should be a way for you to have some kind of person like a mentor assigned to you to, you know, keep your track, keep you in the direction you need to be going. We can't get the time back what we can make up for it, you know. So I'm trying, you know, I'm not the type of person to give up, you know, and I'm gonna keep going until I make it to where I want to be.
Randy Kay, CNN, West Palm Beach, Florida.
Our system of justice is not rehabilitative in general. It's meant to be punitive. We send police out to help people who are mentally ill, who might be having a huge issue. Maybe they forgot to take their medicine or skipped a couple times or were triggered by something. A police officer with a gun, a taser, and handcuffs who knows nothing about mental illness is the last person that needs to be there. I mean, unless they're going to do physical harm to somebody, a lot of these cases do not require a police officer, nor is it appropriate. I mean, think about when a person's homeless, we send out a police officer with a gun, taser, and cuffs to take care of the problem. How about instead we actually help them? Maybe get them a home, help them become stable with a job, give them health care, mental and physical health care. Brooks' interview talks about him desperately needing help. And he didn't get it. He got killed. And right now, a lot of the protests are saying, oh, you know, defund police. And I think most people have no clue what that means. Defund police does not mean take away all their funding and basically have a free-for-all. I wish they had used a different word because it's very confusing. Defund police means give money to police for when somebody is going to kill somebody or, you know, something very dangerous and horrible is going to happen. But cases that need social workers, drug rehabilitative counselors who can get somebody into a program, people who know about programs for the homeless, social workers, psychologists, people who actually help people, not who use guns and tasers and handcuffs and throw them in a cell. Something has to happen, and training is not the answer. It's a culture. We need to defund police and start actually giving a shit about our fellow humans.